Hey everyone, welcome back to another journey through the forgotten corridors of time. Tonight we're diving deep into something that might seem mundane on the surface, but trust me, it's absolutely fascinating when you really think about it. We're exploring the sleep habits of Egyptian pharaohs and other rulers throughout history. Now, before you click away thinking this sounds boring, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how the most powerful people in ancient history actually got their rest? I mean, we're talking about individuals who controlled vast empires, commanded armies of thousands, and were literally considered living gods by their subjects. Yet, at the end of each day, they still had to close their eyes and sleep just like the rest of us. But here's where it gets interesting. Their sleep wasn't just about rest. It was about ritual, about connecting with the divine, about maintaining their power even in unconsciousness. The way these rulers approached sleep reveals so much about their cultures, their beliefs, and their understanding of what it meant to be human while also being divine. So grab your favorite blanket, get comfortable, and let's explore how history's most powerful figures ended their days. The ancient Egyptians had a completely different relationship with sleep than we do today. For the pharaohs, sleep wasn't just a biological necessity. It was a sacred journey into the realm of the gods. Every night when the sun god Ra traveled through the underworld, the pharaoh would symbolically join him in this cosmic voyage. This wasn't just metaphorical thinking either. The Egyptians genuinely believed that during sleep, the pharaoh's soul would separate from his body and commune with the divine powers that governed the universe. The preparation for sleep in the royal palace was an elaborate ritual that could take hours. Long before the pharaoh ever laid his head down, teams of servants would begin the process of preparing the royal bedchamber. The room itself was considered sacred space, oriented according to precise astronomical calculations to align with the movement of the stars. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs that weren't just decorative, but served as protective spells to guard the sleeping ruler from malevolent spirits that might try to attack during his vulnerable state. The pharaoh's bed was a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. Made from the finest ebony and ivory, it was often shaped like a lion, symbolizing the pharaoh's connection to divine strength and courage. The mattress was stuffed with the softest goose down, covered in linens so fine they were almost transparent. But comfort wasn't the primary concern here. Every element of the bed had symbolic meaning. The headrest, carved from stone or wood, was designed not just to support the head, but to elevate it closer to the heavens, facilitating the soul's journey to the divine realm. Before retiring, the pharaoh would undergo a series of purification rituals. His body would be washed with water from the sacred Nile, then anointed with oils that had been blessed by the priests. These weren't just any oils either. They were complex mixtures of frankincense, myrrh, and other precious substances, some imported from as far away as modern-day Somalia and Yemen. The scent of these oils was believed to attract benevolent spirits while repelling harmful ones. The pharaoh's nightclothes were equally significant. Made from the finest linen, they were often white to symbolize purity and rebirth. The fabric itself was considered sacred because it came from the flax plant, which the Egyptians associated with the goddess Isis. Some pharaohs wore special amulets to bed, small gold or silver charms inscribed with protective spells that would guard them throughout the night. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of pharaonic sleep habits was the role of dreams. The Egyptians believed that dreams were direct communications from the gods, and the pharaoh's dreams were considered prophecies that could affect the entire kingdom. Professional dream interpreters, highly trained priests who spent years studying the symbolic language of the divine, would be summoned each morning to analyze and interpret whatever visions the pharaoh had experienced during the night. These dream interpretations weren't taken lightly either. Major political decisions, military campaigns, and even architectural projects could be influenced by what the pharaoh saw in his sleep. There are records of pharaohs changing the course of entire wars based on dream revelations, or commissioning massive construction projects because a god appeared to them in sleep and demanded it. The timing of sleep was also carefully regulated. The pharaoh didn't just go to bed whenever he felt tired. His sleep schedule was coordinated with the movement of celestial bodies, particularly the journey of Ra through the underworld. The ideal time for the pharaoh to fall asleep was when Ra's solar bark was beginning its nightly voyage, allowing the ruler's soul to join this cosmic procession. During the actual hours of sleep, the pharaoh was never truly alone. Guards stood watch outside the bedchamber, but more importantly, priests maintained vigils, chanting protective prayers and burning sacred incense throughout the night. The smoke from this incense was believed to carry the prayers upward to the gods, creating a protective barrier around the sleeping ruler. The pharaoh's awakening was just as ritualized as his sleep. He was typically roused not by servants, but by the first rays of sunlight entering through specially positioned openings in the bedchamber. This timing was crucial because it symbolized the pharaoh's rebirth along with the sun god Ra's daily resurrection. The first thing the pharaoh would see upon waking was often a statue or painting of Ra, reinforcing his divine connection and starting the new day with proper spiritual alignment. But the Egyptians weren't the only ancient civilization with elaborate royal sleep customs. Let's journey north to Mesopotamia, where the kings of Babylon and Assyria had their own fascinating approaches to royal rest. Unlike the Egyptians' focus on cosmic journeys, Mesopotamian rulers were more concerned with prophetic dreams and divine communication during sleep. The Babylonian kings built their bedchambers at the very top of massive ziggurats, those stepped pyramid structures that dominated their cities. This wasn't just about having a good view. By sleeping at the highest point in their domain, these rulers believed they were literally closer to the gods who dwelt in the heavens. The journey to the royal bedchamber was itself a symbolic ascent toward divinity, with each level of the ziggurat representing a different sphere of existence. The Assyrian approach was somewhat different but equally fascinating. Their kings often slept in rooms that were essentially libraries, surrounded by thousands of clay tablets inscribed with laws, prophecies, and historical records. The belief was that knowledge itself was a form of protection, and that surrounding the sleeping king with the accumulated wisdom of the kingdom would grant him divine insight during his dreams. These Mesopotamian rulers also had a unique practice called dream incubation. If a king needed guidance about a particularly difficult decision, he would sleep in a special temple dedicated to the god of dreams. The process involved fasting, ritual purification, and sleeping on a bed that had been blessed by priests. The goal was to receive a prophetic dream that would provide divine guidance for ruling the kingdom. Moving westward to ancient Greece, we encounter yet another approach to royal sleep. The Greek concept of divine kingship was less absolute than in Egypt or Mesopotamia, but their rulers still maintained special sleep practices that reflected their connection to the gods. Greek kings often slept in rooms decorated with images of Morpheus, the god of dreams, and Hypnos, the god of sleep. These weren't just decorative elements but were believed to invoke the presence of these deities during the night. The Greeks also pioneered the use of dream temples, special healing sanctuaries where people could sleep in the presence of the god Asclepius and receive healing dreams. While these were primarily for medical purposes, Greek rulers would sometimes visit these temples when facing particularly challenging decisions or when their regular sleep was troubled by nightmares or insomnia. The Roman emperors took a more practical approach to sleep, though it was still surrounded by ceremony and significance. Roman imperial bedchambers were marvels of engineering, featuring heated floors, running water, and even primitive air conditioning systems. But beyond the luxury, Roman emperors were obsessed with security during sleep. They often had multiple bedrooms and would randomly choose which one to use each night, keeping their actual sleeping location secret from all but their most trusted guards. Some Roman emperors, particularly those who were more paranoid about assassination attempts, would even use body doubles who would sleep in the official imperial bedchamber while the real emperor rested in a hidden location. This practice became so common that some emperors had teams of look-alikes who would take turns serving as sleeping decoys. The emperor's sleep schedule was also tied to administrative duties, in ways that seem almost absurd today. Important documents requiring imperial approval would often be delivered to the bedchamber, and some emperors would literally conduct business from bed, signing decrees and making appointments while lying down. This practice led to the development of special writing surfaces and portable desks designed specifically for use in bed. As we move forward in time to medieval Europe, we see how Christian beliefs transformed royal sleep practices. Medieval kings and queens viewed sleep as a time of vulnerability that required divine protection. Their bedchambers became almost chapel-like spaces, filled with religious imagery and sacred relics. Many medieval rulers would pray for extended periods before sleep, asking for protection from evil spirits and for guidance through dreams. The medieval practice of the royal vigil was particularly interesting. Before major battles or important decisions, kings would sometimes spend entire nights awake in prayer, believing that this sacrifice of sleep would earn them divine favor. When they finally did sleep, it was often on hard surfaces as an act of penance and humility before God. Medieval queens had their own unique sleep challenges, particularly during pregnancy and childbirth. Royal births were public events, and the queen's bedchamber would be filled with witnesses, physicians, and clergy. The bed itself became a stage for political theater, with the successful birth of an heir being seen as divine approval of the royal lineage. The concept of the royal bedroom as a public space might seem strange to us today, but in medieval times, the king's bedchamber was often the most important room in the castle. Important visitors would be received there, councils would be held there, and the daily routine of the court revolved around the king's sleep and waking schedule. The elaborate nature of medieval royal sleep reached its peak during the reign of Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, who turned his daily sleep routine into perhaps the most complex and choreographed performance in European history. The lever and kosher ceremonies, the formal rituals of waking and going to bed, involved dozens of courtiers and could take hours to complete. Every aspect of the king's sleep was public knowledge, from the exact time he retired to the precise manner in which his nightcap was placed upon his head. Louis XIV's bedchamber at Versailles was designed as the literal center of the universe, at least from the perspective of French court life. The bed itself was positioned so that when the king slept, he was perfectly aligned with the rising sun, reinforcing his identity as the Sun King. The morning lever ceremony would begin before dawn, with courtiers arranged in strict hierarchical order based on their privilege to witness different stages of the royal awakening. The most favored nobles had the honor of handing the king his shirt or holding his mirror, while lesser courtiers might only be permitted to watch from a distance. This wasn't just pageantry for its own sake. The proximity to the sleeping and waking king was a direct measure of political power, and courtiers would spend fortunes and decades of their lives maneuvering for the privilege of holding a royal slipper or adjusting a pillow. But the obsession with royal sleep wasn't limited to European monarchs. In imperial China, the sleeping arrangements of emperors were governed by principles of feng shui and cosmic harmony that made even Egyptian practices seem simple by comparison. The Forbidden City in Beijing was designed as a microcosm of the universe, and the emperor's bedchamber sat at its very heart, representing the pole star around which all of existence revolved. Chinese emperors faced unique challenges when it came to sleep. The imperial harem system meant that the emperor had hundreds of potential sleeping companions, and the selection of who would share the imperial bed on any given night was a complex political calculation. The chosen consort would be carried to the emperor's chambers wrapped in a yellow silk cloth by eunuchs, as no one with intact masculine energy was permitted to approach the imperial sleeping quarters. The emperor's bed was a marvel of Chinese craftsmanship, often carved from a single piece of precious wood and inlaid with jade and precious metals. But comfort was secondary to symbolism. The bed was positioned according to precise geomantic calculations, with the headboard facing north to align with the cosmic axis. The bedding was changed daily and had to be made from silk that had been blessed by Taoist priests and dyed using pigments that corresponded to the emperor's astrological requirements. Chinese imperial sleep was also governed by the lunar calendar and the principles of yin and yang. During certain phases of the moon, the emperor was required to sleep alone to maintain cosmic balance. During others, specific rituals had to be performed before sleep to ensure harmony between heaven and earth. The emperor's dreams were recorded by court scribes and interpreted by professional dream readers who held positions of enormous influence in the imperial bureaucracy. The Japanese imperial court developed its own sophisticated approach to royal sleep, heavily influenced by both Chinese traditions and indigenous Shinto beliefs. The emperor's sleeping quarters in the imperial palace were considered so sacred that they were completely rebuilt every 20 years to maintain spiritual purity. The old bedchamber would be dismantled and the materials ceremonially burned, ensuring that no trace of accumulated spiritual impurity could affect the imperial rest. Japanese emperors slept on special tatami mats that were woven by virgin priestesses using rice straw that had been grown in fields blessed by Shinto rituals. The emperor's pillow was filled with rice husks that had been purified through elaborate ceremonies, and the sleeping robes were made from silk produced by silkworms that had been fed only on mulberry leaves grown in temple gardens. The concept of imperial sleep in Japan was closely tied to the emperor's role as a living deity. During sleep, it was believed that the emperor's divine essence would commune with the kami, the spirit beings that inhabited the natural world. The imperial bedchamber was therefore designed as a bridge between the physical and spiritual realms, with specific architectural features that were supposed to facilitate this nightly divine communication. Moving to the Islamic world, we find that the caliphs and sultans developed their own elaborate sleep traditions that blended Arabian customs with the religious requirements of Islam. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad created bedchambers that were marvels of medieval technology, featuring ingenious cooling systems that used flowing water and strategic air currents to maintain comfortable temperatures in the desert climate. Islamic rulers were required to perform ritual ablutions before sleep, and their bedchambers were always oriented toward Mecca to ensure proper spiritual alignment during rest. The beds themselves were often low platforms covered with the finest Persian carpets and surrounded by curtains that could be drawn for privacy, while still allowing air circulation in the hot climate. The Ottoman sultans took royal sleep practices to extraordinary levels of complexity. The sultan's bedchamber in the Topkapi Palace was protected by multiple layers of security, with different groups of guards responsible for different areas around the sleeping quarters. The famous Janissaries, the elite Ottoman military corps, would maintain silent vigils outside the imperial bedroom, while specially trained eunuchs guarded the inner chambers. Ottoman sultans also had to navigate the politics of the imperial harem, which could involve hundreds of women all competing for the honor of sharing the sultan's bed. The selection process was managed by the Valide Sultan, the sultan's mother, who wielded enormous power over the succession and the daily operations of the empire. The chosen woman would be prepared through elaborate bathing and perfuming rituals that could take an entire day to complete. The beds used by Ottoman sultans were works of art in themselves. often featuring intricate mother-of-pearl inlays and silk hangings embroidered with verses from the Quran. The mattresses were stuffed with the finest down and covered with sheets made from Egyptian cotton so fine it was almost transparent. But perhaps most remarkably, Ottoman imperial bedchambers featured some of the earliest examples of adjustable furniture, with beds that could be raised or lowered to accommodate the Sultan's preferences. In India, the Mughal emperors combined Persian, Central Asian, and local Indian traditions to create their own unique approach to royal sleep. The Emperor Akbar, known for his religious tolerance and administrative innovations, designed his sleeping quarters to reflect his philosophical beliefs about the unity of all religions. His bedchamber contained symbols from Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, creating a space where the emperor could commune with the divine regardless of its particular manifestation. Mughal imperial beds were often made from sandalwood, prized not only for its beauty, but for its insect-repelling properties and its association with spiritual purity in Hindu tradition. The bedding was scented with rosewater and jasmine, and the emperor would often sleep on silk sheets that had been cooled with ice brought down from the Himalayan mountains by relay teams of runners. The Mughal practice of royal sleep was also influenced by the hot Indian climate, leading to innovations like the earliest forms of air conditioning. Palace architects designed bedchambers with complex ventilation systems that drew cool air up from underground chambers and across pools of scented water. Some Mughal bedrooms featured walls made of wet grass mats that cooled the air through evaporation, creating surprisingly comfortable sleeping conditions even during the scorching summer months. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Mughal emperors were among the first rulers to keep detailed sleep diaries, recording not only their dreams, but also their sleep quality, duration, and any factors that might have affected their rest. These records, some of which survive today, provide fascinating insights into the daily lives of these powerful rulers and reveal that even emperors struggled with insomnia, nightmares, and the stress-related sleep disorders that seem to be universal human experiences. The Safavid Shahs of Persia developed their own elaborate sleep rituals that reflected the mystical traditions of Sufi Islam. The royal bedchamber was designed as a representation of paradise, with flowing water features, gardens visible through specially designed windows, and walls decorated with poetry that was believed to induce peaceful dreams. The Shah would often fall asleep to the sound of court musicians playing specially composed lullabies that were said to facilitate communication with divine spirits during sleep. As we move into the early modern period, we see how European royal sleep practices began to evolve in response to new ideas about health, hygiene, and the nature of monarchy itself. The English monarchs of the Tudor and Stuart periods maintained elaborate sleep ceremonies, but these began to incorporate new medical theories about the importance of fresh air and cleanliness for healthy rest. Henry VIII, despite his many wives and political complexities, maintained surprisingly consistent sleep habits throughout his reign. His bedchamber at Hampton Court was designed with multiple fireplaces to ensure warmth during the cold English winters, and he employed teams of servants whose only job was to maintain the perfect temperature and air quality in the royal sleeping quarters. The Stuart kings faced unique challenges when it came to sleep security, particularly during the turbulent years leading up to and following the English Civil War. Charles I was so paranoid about assassination attempts that he would often change bedrooms multiple times during a single night, and his sleep was frequently interrupted by the need to review military dispatches and political intelligence. The restoration of the monarchy under Charles II brought about a fascinating transformation in royal sleep practices. Having spent years in exile on the continent, Charles returned to England with a decidedly more relaxed and cosmopolitan approach to royal rest. His bedchamber at Whitehall Palace became famous for its informal atmosphere, where the king would often receive visitors while still in his nightgown, conducting business from bed, in a manner that scandalized the more traditional courtiers who remembered the rigid formality of his father's reign. Charles II also introduced the continental practice of the royal mistress having her own apartments adjacent to the king's bedchamber, creating complex sleeping arrangements that reflected the political realities of court life. The king's official consort, Queen Catherine of Braganza, maintained the formal royal bedchamber, while his various mistresses, including the famous Nell Gwyn, had their own elaborately appointed sleeping quarters nearby. The logistics of managing these multiple sleeping arrangements required a small army of discreet servants who became expert at facilitating the king's nocturnal movements without creating public scandal. The Great Fire of London in 1666 provided an unexpected opportunity to redesign the royal sleeping quarters with the latest innovations in architecture and engineering. The new palace designs incorporated improved ventilation systems, better heating, and even primitive forms of soundproofing to ensure the king's rest wouldn't be disturbed by the noise of the bustling city outside. These technological improvements represented a shift toward viewing royal sleep through a more scientific lens, rather than purely ceremonial or mystical terms. Louis XIV's influence on European court culture extended far beyond France, and his elaborate sleep ceremonies inspired imitation throughout the continent. The German princes and the Habsburg emperors all developed their own versions of the lever and kosher rituals, though none quite matched the complexity of the Versailles model. The Austrian court, in particular, became famous for its rigid sleeping protocols, where the emperor's bedtime routine could take up to 3 hours and involved more than 50 different courtiers, each with specific roles and responsibilities. The Spanish court under the later Habsburgs developed perhaps the most extreme version of ceremonial royal sleep. The Spanish monarchs were so hedged about with protocol that they were essentially prisoners of their own sleeping rituals. The king couldn't even scratch his nose during the bedtime ceremony without violating court etiquette, and there are recorded instances of Spanish kings suffering from insomnia simply because the stress of the nightly ritual made it impossible for them to relax. The rise of Enlightenment thinking in the 18th century began to challenge these elaborate sleep ceremonies, as philosophers and physicians argued that excessive formality was actually harmful to royal health. Voltaire famously mocked the French court's sleeping rituals, suggesting that the king would be better served by a simple bed and a good night's rest than by hours of ceremonial preparation. These criticisms began to influence royal practice, though change came slowly to institutions as conservative as European monarchies. Catherine the Great of Russia represents an interesting case study in the evolution of royal sleep practices during this period. Having come to power through a coup against her husband, she was acutely aware of the vulnerability that sleep represented for any ruler. Her bedchamber in the Winter Palace was designed with multiple hidden exits and secret passages that would allow her to escape quickly if threatened during the night. She also maintained a network of trusted servants who would take turns sleeping in adjacent rooms, ready to wake her at the first sign of danger. Catherine's approach to sleep also reflected her intellectual interests and her desire to present herself as an enlightened monarch. Her bedchamber was filled with books, and she would often read late into the night, working on her correspondence with European philosophers or reviewing the latest scientific treatises. She believed that learning was a continuous process that shouldn't be interrupted by something as mundane as sleep, and she developed the habit of keeping a notebook by her bed to record any insights or ideas that came to her during the night. The American Revolution and the establishment of Republican government created entirely new questions about how heads of state should approach sleep and rest. George Washington, as the first president, had no royal traditions to fall back on and had to essentially invent appropriate sleeping practices for a democratic leader. His approach was notably modest compared to European monarchs, reflecting the Republican ideals of the new nation. Washington slept in a simple bed, maintained regular hours, and avoided the elaborate ceremonies that characterized royal courts. However, even Washington's relatively modest approach to presidential sleep became a matter of public interest and political symbolism. His critics argued that any special arrangements for the president's rest smacked of monarchical pretensions, while his supporters maintained that the nation's leader deserved basic comfort and security during sleep. These debates established patterns that would influence how American presidents approached their private lives for generations to come. The French Revolution brought a violent end to many of the elaborate royal sleep traditions that had developed over centuries. The execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette sent shockwaves through European aristocracy, and many monarchs began to simplify their own sleeping arrangements out of fear that excessive luxury might provoke similar uprisings among their own subjects. The age of the elaborate lever and kosher ceremonies was largely over, replaced by more modest and private approaches to royal rest. Napoleon's rise to power created new models for how leaders might approach sleep and rest. As a military commander, Napoleon had learned to sleep wherever and whenever circumstances allowed, often catching brief naps on battlefields or in the saddles of his horse. When he became emperor, he brought this practical approach to imperial sleep, maintaining relatively simple sleeping arrangements even in the grand palaces of the French Empire. Napoleon famously claimed that he could fall asleep anywhere within 15 minutes, a skill he had developed during his military campaigns. The Napoleonic approach to imperial sleep emphasized function over ceremony, reflecting the practical demands of governing a vast empire that stretched from Spain to Poland. Napoleon's bedchambers were designed for efficiency rather than grandeur, with multiple clocks to ensure he could maintain his demanding schedule, and maps and documents always within easy reach so he could continue working even during brief rest periods. This represented a fundamental shift away from the mystical and ceremonial approaches to royal sleep that had dominated earlier periods. The Industrial Revolution brought new challenges and opportunities for royal sleep practices. Improved transportation meant that monarchs could travel more frequently and more comfortably, but it also meant that their sleeping arrangements had to be portable and adaptable. The development of railway travel led to the creation of elaborate royal sleeping cars, essentially mobile palaces that allowed monarchs to maintain their rest routines even while traveling across their domains. Queen Victoria's approach to sleep reflected both her personal character and the changing nature of monarchy in the 19th century. Following the death of Prince Albert, Victoria's sleeping arrangements became almost monastically simple, reflecting her deep mourning and her withdrawal from many of the ceremonial aspects of royal life. She slept in a narrow bed, surrounded by photographs and mementos of her deceased husband, and maintained a daily routine that was remarkable for its regularity and simplicity. The Victorian era also saw the beginning of scientific study of sleep itself, and royal households began to incorporate new medical understanding into their approach to rest and sleep hygiene. Royal physicians started paying attention to factors like room temperature, air quality, and bedding materials, moving away from purely traditional approaches toward evidence-based recommendations for healthy sleep. This represented the beginning of the modern approach to understanding sleep as a biological process rather than a mystical or ceremonial activity. The German Kaiser Wilhelm II exemplified many of the tensions between traditional royal sleep practices and modern scientific understanding. Wilhelm suffered from chronic insomnia, possibly related to his difficult birth and subsequent physical disabilities, and his physicians experimented with various treatments including new medications, special diets, and even early forms of what we would now call sleep hygiene protocols. His case became a testing ground for the application of modern medicine to royal health problems. The decline of absolute monarchy in the 20th century brought about the final transformation of royal sleep practices. The surviving monarchies of Europe began to adopt more middle-class approaches to rest and privacy, abandoning most of the elaborate ceremonies that had characterized royal sleep for centuries. The British royal family, in particular, became famous for their relatively modest sleeping arrangements, though they still maintained certain traditions around state occasions and ceremonial events. The two world wars had a profound impact on how even royal families approached sleep and rest. During the London Blitz, the British royal family had to adapt to sleeping in air raid shelters, sharing the common experience of interrupted sleep and constant vigilance that characterized civilian life during wartime. This shared experience helped to democratize royal sleep practices in ways that centuries of political evolution had not achieved. Modern royalty faces entirely different challenges when it comes to sleep and rest. Security concerns remain paramount, but they now involve sophisticated electronic surveillance systems rather than human guards standing outside bedchamber doors. The constant media attention means that even royal sleeping arrangements can become matters of public interest and political controversy. The integration of modern technology into royal households has also changed the nature of royal sleep, with monarchs now having to deal with the same screen time and digital connectivity issues that affect sleep quality for people throughout the world. The study of historical royal sleep practices reveals fascinating insights into the evolution of human understanding about rest, health, and the nature of political power itself. From the cosmic journeys of Egyptian pharaohs to the practical efficiency of Napoleon's battlefield naps, the way rulers have approached sleep reflects broader cultural values and beliefs about leadership, divinity, and human nature. These practices also demonstrate the universal human need for rest and the creative ways that different cultures have tried to optimize and protect this vulnerable state. As we drift off to sleep ourselves, we can perhaps appreciate how much simpler our own bedtime routines are compared to the elaborate ceremonies and complex preparations that once surrounded the sleep of history's most powerful rulers. Yet, in some ways, the basic challenges remain the same. We all need to find ways to transition from the demands and stresses of daily life into peaceful rest, and we all face the fundamental vulnerability that comes with sleep. The pharaohs may have had their protective spells and golden beds, but in the end, they still had to close their eyes and trust in the darkness, just as we do every night. The elaborate sleeping rituals of ancient and medieval rulers may seem strange to us now, but they represent humanity's ongoing effort to understand and optimize one of our most basic biological needs. Whether through mystical ceremonies, technological innovations, or scientific study, people have always sought ways to improve their sleep and make the most of their rest. In that sense, the sleep habits of Egyptian pharaohs and medieval kings are not so different from our own contemporary obsessions with sleep hygiene, bedtime routines, and creating the perfect sleeping environment. Perhaps there's something we can learn from these historical approaches to sleep, not in their specific practices, but in their recognition that rest is important enough to deserve attention, planning, and care. The pharaohs understood that sleep was sacred. The medieval kings knew it required protection, and the Enlightenment monarchs began to see it as a matter of health and science. Today, as we lie in our climate-controlled bedrooms with memory foam mattresses and blackout curtains, we're essentially continuing a tradition that stretches back thousands of years. The human quest for perfect sleep has remained remarkably consistent, even as the methods have evolved dramatically. The Russian czars developed their own unique approach to imperial sleep that reflected the harsh realities of ruling the world's largest empire. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg was designed not just for grandeur, but for survival during the brutal Russian winters. The Tsar's bedchamber featured multiple fireplaces that burned continuously throughout the night, tended by servants who worked in shifts to ensure the imperial rest was never interrupted by cold. Peter the Great, famous for his efforts to westernize Russia, brought European sleeping customs to the Russian court, but adapted them to local conditions. His bedchamber featured the latest Dutch innovations in heating and ventilation, but also included traditional Russian elements like thick fur coverings and heated stones that were placed in the bed before the Tsar retired. Peter was also notorious for his irregular sleep schedule, often staying awake for days during important projects, and then sleeping for 12 or 14 hours at a stretch. The Romanov dynasty that followed Peter maintained elaborate sleeping protocols that combined Byzantine imperial traditions with more modern European practices. The Tsar's bedtime routine included the reading of daily reports from across the vast Russian Empire, a practice that often extended well into the night during times of crisis or war. The imperial bedchamber was equipped with special communication systems that allowed urgent messages to reach the Tsar even during sleep, though disturbing the imperial rest was considered such a serious matter that only the most trusted advisors were authorized to do so. Catherine the Great's sleeping arrangements reflected her complex position as a German princess ruling a Russian empire. Her bedchamber incorporated elements from her native Germany, including feather beds and linen that was imported from Bavaria, but also featured Russian Orthodox icons and other traditional elements that helped legitimize her rule in the eyes of her subjects. Catherine was known to be a light sleeper, possibly due to the constant political pressures she faced, and she developed the habit of keeping detailed journals that she would write in during bouts of insomnia. The palace intrigues that characterized Russian court's life created unique challenges for imperial sleep. The Tsars lived in constant awareness that their bedchambers could become sites of assassination or coup attempts, and many developed elaborate security protocols around their sleeping arrangements. Some Tsars used multiple bedrooms and would randomly select their sleeping location each night. Others employed trusted servants who would sleep in the same room, ready to raise alarms at the first sign of danger. The Mongol Khans, who had conquered vast territories stretching from China to Eastern Europe, faced entirely different challenges when it came to sleep and rest. As nomadic rulers, they had to maintain their authority while constantly moving across the steppes with their armies and courts. The great Khan's sleeping arrangements had to be portable, practical, and yet still maintain the ceremonial dignity required of a ruler who claimed dominion over much of the known world. The Mongol imperial jur, or yurt, was a marvel of nomadic engineering designed specifically for the needs of a traveling ruler. The Khan's sleeping area was positioned at the back of the jur, the most honored location, and was separated from the rest of the space by elaborate hangings made from silk and fur. The bed itself was a raised platform that could be quickly assembled or disassembled as the court moved from place to place. Mongol Khans maintained their connection to shamanic traditions, even as their empire incorporated diverse religious and cultural practices. The imperial sleeping arrangements included space for shamanic rituals and the consultation of omens and dreams. The Khan's dreams were considered crucial intelligence for the empire's future direction, and professional dream interpreters traveled with the imperial court specifically to analyze and advise on the ruler's nocturnal visions. The seasonal migrations that characterized Mongol court life created complex logistical challenges around imperial sleep. During winter camps, the Khan's sleeping arrangements could become quite elaborate, with multiple layers of insulation and heating systems designed to withstand the brutal steppe winters. Summer camps required different approaches, with emphasis on ventilation and protection from insects and the heat of the sun. The Inca emperors of Peru developed sleeping practices that reflected their unique position as rulers of a mountain empire. The Sapa Inca was considered a direct descendant of the sun god Inti, and his sleeping arrangements were designed to maintain this cosmic connection even during rest. The imperial bedchamber in Cusco was positioned to align with specific astronomical phenomena, and the emperor's sleep schedule was coordinated with the movement of celestial bodies across the Andean sky. Inca imperial beds were made from the finest vicuña wool, a material so precious that only the royal family was permitted to use it. The bedding was woven by chosen women, virgins dedicated to the service of the sun god, who spent their entire lives creating textiles for imperial use. The patterns woven into the imperial bedding weren't merely decorative, but contained symbolic messages about the emperor's divine nature and his connection to the cosmic order. The high altitude of the Inca capital presented unique challenges for royal sleep. The thin air of the Andean highlands could cause sleep disturbances, and the imperial physicians developed special breathing techniques and herbal remedies to help the emperor achieve restful sleep despite the environmental challenges. The imperial bedchamber featured special ventilation systems designed to optimize airflow and oxygen levels for better sleep quality. Inca imperial sleep was also closely tied to the agricultural calendar that governed the empire. The emperor's rest schedule was coordinated with planting and harvesting seasons, religious festivals, and the complex administrative requirements of governing an empire that stretched along the entire western coast of South America. During certain ceremonial periods, the emperor was required to remain awake for extended periods, participating in rituals that could last for days. The Aztec emperors of Mexico developed their own sophisticated approach to imperial sleep that reflected their position at the center of a complex tribute empire. The Huey Tlatoani, as the Aztec emperor was known, slept in chambers within the great palace complex of Tenochtitlan, surrounded by gardens, aviaries, and the administrative centers that governed an empire of millions of people. Aztec imperial sleeping arrangements incorporated the complex religious and cosmological beliefs of Mesoamerican civilization. The emperor's bedchamber was positioned according to the principles of Aztec astronomy and cosmology, with specific orientations that aligned with the movements of Venus, the Pleiades, and other celestially significant features. The bed itself was often carved with representations of feathered serpents, eagles, and other symbols of imperial power and divine authority. The Aztec emphasis on human sacrifice created unique spiritual dimensions to imperial sleep. The emperor was responsible for maintaining the cosmic balance that kept the sun rising and the world functioning, and his dreams were analyzed for signs about when and how many sacrifices might be required to maintain universal harmony. Professional priest astronomers maintained vigils outside the imperial bedchamber, ready to interpret any unusual dreams or sleep disturbances that might indicate cosmic imbalance. The conquest of Mexico by Spanish forces brought a violent end to these indigenous imperial sleep traditions, but also created fascinating hybrid practices as Spanish colonial administrators attempted to adapt European royal customs to American conditions. The Spanish viceroys who governed Mexico maintained elaborate sleeping protocols that combined Habsburg court traditions with practical adaptations to the tropical climate and indigenous cultural expectations. The Maya city-states of the classical period had developed their own approaches to royal sleep that reflected the complex political and religious structure of Maya civilization. Maya rulers slept in chambers within massive pyramid complexes that served as both religious centers and administrative headquarters. The royal sleeping quarters were positioned to align with specific astronomical events that were crucial for Maya calendrical and religious observances. Maya royal beds were often carved from single pieces of precious wood and decorated with jade, shell, and other valuable materials. The bedding incorporated textiles woven with complex symbolic patterns that told stories about the ruler's ancestry, divine connections, and political achievements. The Maya emphasis on bloodline legitimacy meant that royal sleeping arrangements often included shrines to royal ancestors, allowing the sleeping ruler to maintain connection with the dynasty's spiritual foundations. The Maya practice of royal bloodletting created unique rituals around imperial sleep. Rulers would sometimes perform bloodletting ceremonies before sleep, believing that the offering of royal blood would ensure peaceful rest and prophetic dreams. The wounds from these ceremonies would be carefully tended during sleep, and the bloodied textiles were preserved as sacred relics that carried the essence of royal divinity. The collapse of classical Maya civilization brought an end to these elaborate royal sleep traditions, but some elements persisted in the highland Maya kingdoms that survived into the colonial period. These later Maya rulers adapted their sleeping practices to incorporate Christian elements while maintaining traditional astronomical and calendrical observances. Moving to Africa, we find that the kingdoms of that continent developed their own distinctive approaches to royal sleep that reflected the diverse cultural and environmental conditions of the continent. The pharaohs of Nubia, who ruled the kingdom of Kush, maintained sleeping practices that combined ancient Egyptian traditions with indigenous African customs and beliefs. The Nubian pharaohs slept in pyramid complexes that were smaller but more numerous than their Egyptian counterparts. These royal burial complexes included sleeping chambers designed for use during the ruler's lifetime, allowing the pharaoh to periodically commune with the spirits of deceased ancestors. The royal beds were carved from African ebony and decorated with gold and ivory in patterns that reflected both Egyptian and indigenous African artistic traditions. The kingdoms of West Africa developed their own elaborate royal sleep customs that reflected the complex political structures of states like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. The Mansa, or Emperor of Mali, maintained sleeping quarters within palace complexes that were marvels of Sudanic architecture. The royal bedchamber featured innovative cooling systems designed to provide comfort during the intense heat of the West African climate. The Mali imperial sleep traditions incorporated Islamic practices brought by Arab traders and scholars, but also maintained connections to traditional African religious beliefs. The Mansa's sleeping arrangements included space for Islamic prayers and Quranic recitation, but also featured traditional African protective charms and ancestral shrines. The integration of these different religious traditions created unique hybrid practices that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of medieval West African empires. The Ethiopian emperors claimed descent from the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and their sleeping arrangements reflected these legendary connections. The imperial bedchamber in the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela was carved directly from living stone, creating sleeping spaces that were simultaneously royal quarters and sacred religious sites. The emperor's bed was positioned to align with specific biblical and astronomical references that reinforced the dynasty's claims to divine legitimacy. Ethiopian imperial sleep practices incorporated elements from Coptic Christianity, ancient Aksumite traditions, and the diverse cultural influences that shaped the Ethiopian highlands. The emperor's sleeping robes were made from cotton grown in the highlands and woven with patterns that told stories from Ethiopian religious and historical traditions. The bedchamber featured ancient manuscripts and religious artifacts that created an atmosphere of scholarly contemplation and spiritual reflection. The Swahili city-states of the East African coast developed royal sleep traditions that reflected their position as intermediaries between African, Arab, and Indian Ocean commercial and cultural networks. The sultans who ruled these coastal cities maintained sleeping quarters that combined Afro-Arab architectural styles with practical adaptations to the tropical coastal environment. These coastal rulers faced unique challenges related to the monsoon winds that governed Indian Ocean trade. The Sultan's sleeping schedule was often coordinated with these seasonal wind patterns, as the arrival of trading fleets required constant attention to diplomatic and commercial affairs. The royal sleeping quarters featured innovative ventilation systems designed to capture cooling sea breezes while protecting against the intense humidity of the tropical coast. The island kingdoms of Madagascar developed their own distinctive royal sleep traditions that reflected the unique cultural synthesis of African, Arab, and Southeast Asian influences that characterized Malagasy civilization. The Marina Kingdom's royal sleeping practices incorporated elements from all of these cultural traditions, creating hybrid customs that were distinctively Malagasy. The tombs and sleeping quarters of Malagasy royalty were often the same structures, reflecting beliefs about the continuity between life and death that were central to traditional Malagasy religion. The royal beds were positioned to align with ancestral burial sites, allowing the sleeping ruler to maintain communication with the spirits of deceased kings and queens who continued to influence the affairs of the living. As we trace these diverse traditions of royal sleep across different continents and cultures, we begin to see common patterns that reveal universal human concerns about rest, security, and the maintenance of political authority. Whether in the pyramids of Egypt, the yurts of Mongolia, or the stone churches of Ethiopia, rulers have always had to balance their human need for sleep with their public responsibilities and the symbolic requirements of their position. The elaborate sleeping rituals and customs we've explored tonight weren't just displays of wealth or power, though they certainly served those functions. They were attempts to solve fundamental problems about how to maintain authority and legitimacy while experiencing the universal vulnerability that comes with sleep. Every ruler, no matter how powerful, had to find ways to rest safely while remaining connected to the divine sources of their authority and the practical demands of governance. These historical approaches to royal sleep also reveal changing ideas about the nature of political power itself. The mystical and religious aspects of early royal sleep practices reflected societies where rulers were seen as divine or semi-divine beings, whose connection to the gods required constant maintenance and protection. The more practical and scientific approaches that developed later reflected the emergence of more secular and rational approaches to government and administration. The security concerns that surrounded royal sleep throughout history remind us that political power has always been precarious, dependent on the consent and cooperation of subjects who might withdraw their support at any moment. The elaborate precautions taken to protect sleeping rulers reveal the constant anxiety that characterized political life in societies where succession disputes, palace coups, and assassination attempts were constant possibilities. Modern studies of sleep have revealed just how crucial rest is for cognitive function, emotional regulation, and physical health. When we consider the enormous pressures faced by historical rulers, their attention to sleep quality becomes even more understandable. These leaders were making decisions that could affect millions of lives, conducting complex diplomatic negotiations, and managing vast administrative systems. The quality of their rest directly impacted their ability to think clearly and make sound judgments. The evolution of royal bedchamber design also reflects broader technological and architectural developments throughout history. The Romans pioneered hypocaust heating systems that could warm sleeping quarters from below. Medieval castle builders developed sophisticated chimney systems that could heat multiple rooms while venting smoke safely. Renaissance architects created bedchambers with improved natural lighting and ventilation that promoted healthier sleep environments. The textile traditions associated with royal bedding reveal fascinating insights into ancient trade networks and economic systems. The Silk Roads that connected East and West were partly sustained by the demand for luxury sleeping materials in royal courts. Egyptian linen, Chinese silk, and Indian cotton became symbols of political power, precisely because they were so difficult and expensive to obtain. The quality of a ruler's bedding could serve as a visible demonstration of their kingdom's wealth and commercial connections. Seasonal variations in royal sleep practices also tell us about how pre-industrial societies adapted to natural rhythms that modern life has largely obscured. Many rulers adjusted their sleep schedules according to agricultural calendars, religious festivals, and astronomical events. Winter sleep patterns were necessarily different from summer ones, not just because of temperature variations, but because the available daylight hours affected when work could be accomplished and when rest became necessary. The role of music in royal sleep traditions deserves particular attention. Court musicians weren't just entertainers, but served important functions in helping rulers achieve restful sleep. Lullabies, instrumental pieces, and even ambient sounds like flowing water or wind chimes were carefully orchestrated to promote relaxation and peaceful dreams. Some cultures developed specific musical modes and rhythms that were believed to have therapeutic effects on sleep quality. The dietary practices associated with royal sleep reveal early understanding of nutrition's impact on rest. Many rulers followed specific eating schedules designed to optimize their sleep, avoiding heavy meals close to bedtime, or consuming particular foods believed to promote peaceful dreams. Ancient medical traditions often included detailed instructions about how different foods might affect sleep quality, and royal physicians would carefully monitor their sovereign's diet to ensure optimal rest. The seasonal migration patterns of nomadic empires created unique challenges for maintaining consistent sleep quality, while constantly moving across diverse landscapes and climates. The Mongol Empire's expansion across Eurasia required rulers to adapt their sleeping arrangements to drastically different environments, from the frigid steppes of Central Asia to the humid river valleys of China. These adaptations demonstrate remarkable flexibility and practical wisdom about how to maintain health and authority under constantly changing conditions. The architectural innovations developed for royal sleeping quarters often influenced broader building practices and eventually benefited ordinary people. Improvements in heating, ventilation, and structural design that were first implemented in royal bedchambers gradually spread to other buildings. The medieval development of glass windows, for example, was partly driven by the desire to create better sleeping environments for rulers, but eventually transformed architecture throughout society. The ceremonial aspects of royal sleep also served important political functions beyond their obvious symbolic value. The daily rituals surrounding a ruler's rest and awakening created predictable schedules that allowed courtiers and administrators to plan their own activities. The lever and coucher ceremonies weren't just pageantry, but practical administrative tools that helped organize the complex social and political life of royal courts. The medical attention paid to royal sleep revealed early understanding of what we now call sleep disorders. Historical records contain descriptions of royal insomnia, nightmares, and other sleep disturbances that clearly troubled rulers throughout history. The treatments attempted by court physicians, while often ineffective by modern standards, demonstrate sophisticated observation of sleep patterns and genuine attempts to understand the relationship between rest and health. The gender differences in royal sleep practices reveal important insights about how different societies understood the roles and vulnerabilities of male and female rulers. Queens and empresses often faced unique challenges related to pregnancy, childbirth, and the political implications of producing heirs. Their sleeping arrangements had to accommodate these biological realities while maintaining the dignity and security required of sovereign authority. The international diplomatic aspects of royal sleep are particularly fascinating. Foreign ambassadors and visiting dignitaries would be carefully housed in sleeping quarters that reflected their status and the political relationships between their kingdoms. The quality and location of guest bedrooms became forms of diplomatic communication, conveying messages about alliance, respect, and political priorities without requiring explicit verbal negotiation. The preservation of royal sleeping quarters as historical sites has created unique challenges for archaeologists and historians. Unlike public buildings or religious structures, bedchambers were private spaces that were often modified or destroyed when dynasties changed. The few royal sleeping areas that have survived provide invaluable insights into daily life and personal habits that are rarely documented in official histories. The influence of climate on royal sleep practices extended far beyond simple comfort considerations. Rulers in tropical regions developed entirely different approaches to rest than those in temperate or Arctic climates. The timing of daily activities, the materials used for bedding and clothing, and even the architectural design of sleeping spaces all reflected adaptations to local environmental conditions. The transition from seasonal to artificial lighting had profound impacts on royal sleep patterns. Before candles and oil lamps became widespread, even the most powerful rulers were largely constrained by natural light cycles. The development of reliable artificial lighting allowed for extended evening activities and more flexible sleep schedules, but also created new challenges related to sleep quality and circadian rhythm regulation. The economic implications of royal sleep practices were enormous. The resources devoted to creating and maintaining elaborate sleeping arrangements represented significant portions of royal treasuries. The craftsmen, servants, and guards required to support these systems created entire economic sectors devoted to royal comfort and security. These expenditures often became sources of political tension when subjects questioned whether such luxury was appropriate during times of hardship. The religious and philosophical evolution of royal sleep practices reflects broader changes in human understanding of consciousness, dreams, and the nature of divine authority. Early rulers who saw sleep as mystical communion with gods gradually gave way to more secular approaches that emphasized health, security, and administrative efficiency. This transition reveals changing ideas about the source and nature of political legitimacy. The role of royal children in these sleeping traditions created unique educational and socialization challenges. Young princes and princesses had to learn elaborate protocols while developing healthy sleep habits that would serve them throughout their lives. The balance between ceremonial requirements and child development needs often created tensions that required careful management by royal tutors and physicians. The seasonal festivals and celebrations that punctuated royal calendars often included special sleeping arrangements and overnight ceremonies. These events required temporary modifications to standard sleeping practices and created opportunities for displaying royal magnificence to wider audiences. The logistics of managing these special occasions revealed the sophisticated organizational capabilities of successful royal administrations. The development of portable royal sleeping arrangements for military campaigns and diplomatic journeys represents fascinating innovations in design and engineering. Rulers had to maintain their dignity and comfort while traveling, but also remain mobile and secure. The solutions developed for these challenges often influenced civilian furniture design and travel practices. The psychological aspects of royal sleep are perhaps the most intriguing elements of these historical practices. The constant awareness of political vulnerability, the pressure of decision-making responsibility, and the isolation that came with supreme authority all created unique mental health challenges that affected sleep quality. The coping mechanisms developed by successful rulers reveal remarkable psychological resilience and practical wisdom. The transition from monarchy to other forms of government brought about the gradual abandonment of most elaborate royal sleep traditions. Modern heads of state maintain security and comfort requirements, but the mystical and ceremonial aspects of leadership rest have largely disappeared. This change reflects broader transformations in how societies understand political authority and the relationship between leaders and citizens. The documentation of royal sleep practices in historical records provides valuable data for modern sleep researchers studying the relationship between stress, responsibility, and rest quality. The detailed observations recorded by court physicians and chroniclers offer insights into sleep patterns and disorders that complement contemporary scientific research. The artistic representations of royal sleep in paintings, sculptures, and literary works reveal how different cultures visualized the relationship between power and rest. These artistic depictions often emphasized the vulnerability and humanity of rulers while maintaining appropriate respect for their authority. The symbolism embedded in these works provides additional layers of meaning beyond their obvious documentary value. The architectural legacy of royal sleeping quarters continues to influence modern design principles. The attention to comfort, security, privacy, and aesthetic beauty that characterize the best historical examples provides inspiration for contemporary architects and interior designers. The integration of natural lighting, ventilation, and temperature control that was pioneered in royal bedchambers has become standard in modern residential design. The multicultural exchange that occurred through royal marriage and diplomatic relations created fascinating hybrid sleeping traditions. When rulers from different cultures married or formed alliances, their sleeping practices often blended in ways that created entirely new customs. These cultural fusions demonstrate the adaptability and creativity that characterized successful royal courts. The seasonal rhythms that governed royal sleep in pre-industrial societies offer insights that remain relevant for modern sleep health. The natural patterns of rest and activity that aligned with daylight cycles, agricultural seasons, and religious calendars may have promoted better sleep quality than our contemporary 24-hour artificial environments. As we reflect on these diverse traditions of royal sleep across cultures and centuries, we're reminded that the fundamental human need for rest transcends all boundaries of time, geography, and social status. The elaborate ceremonies and precautions that surrounded royal sleep weren't just displays of power, but genuine attempts to optimize one of life's most essential processes. The universal challenges faced by rulers throughout history, the need for security during vulnerability, the pressure to maintain dignity while experiencing basic human needs, the requirement to balance personal comfort with public responsibility, continue to resonate in contemporary leadership contexts. Modern executives, politicians, and other leaders still struggle with many of the same issues that kept ancient pharaohs awake at night. The wisdom embedded in these historical sleep practices, stripped of their ceremonial elements, offers practical insights for anyone seeking to improve their rest. The attention to environment, routine, security, and mental preparation that characterized the best royal sleep traditions can inform modern approaches to sleep hygiene and bedroom design. The gradual democratization of comfort and security that once was available only to royalty represents one of humanity's great achievements. The heating, lighting, comfortable bedding, and physical security that modern people take for granted were once the exclusive privileges of the most powerful individuals in society. Our contemporary sleep experiences, in many ways, surpass what was available to the greatest rulers of the past. The scientific understanding of sleep that has developed over the past century has revealed that many traditional royal sleep practices were remarkably sophisticated in their approach to optimizing rest quality. The emphasis on routine, environment, and mental preparation that characterized these historical traditions aligns closely with modern sleep medicine recommendations. The story of royal sleep throughout history is ultimately a story about the human quest for rest, security, and renewal in the face of enormous responsibilities and pressures. Whether wrapped in mystical ceremony or guided by practical necessity, the search for peaceful sleep has remained a constant throughout human civilization, connecting us across the centuries to every ruler who ever struggled to find rest while bearing the weight of leadership. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of studying these royal sleep traditions is how they reveal the fundamental humanity that existed beneath all the ceremony and power. No matter how elaborate the preparations, how precious the materials, or how complex the rituals, every ruler ultimately faced the same basic challenge that confronts us all. They had to quiet their minds, relax their bodies, and surrender consciousness to sleep, trusting that they would wake safely to face another day. The transition periods between different dynasties and empires often brought dramatic changes to royal sleep practices, as new rulers sought to establish their legitimacy by either continuing or deliberately breaking with their predecessors' traditions. The Meiji Restoration in Japan, for example, saw the abandonment of centuries-old imperial sleeping customs as the country modernized and westernized its institutions. The emperor's traditional sleeping arrangements, which had remained virtually unchanged for over 1,000 years, were suddenly replaced with Western-style bedrooms and European furniture. This cultural transformation wasn't merely aesthetic, but represented fundamental changes in how Japanese society understood the nature of imperial authority. The mystical aspects of imperial sleep, the connection to Shinto deities and the spiritual realm, were gradually replaced by more practical considerations of health, hygiene, and efficiency. The emperor's sleeping quarters became private rather than sacred, personal rather than cosmic. Similar transformations occurred throughout the world as traditional monarchies either collapsed or adapted to changing times. The Russian Revolution brought a violent end to centuries of Tsarist sleeping traditions, while the Chinese Revolution eliminated imperial sleep practices that had evolved over thousands of years. These political upheavals didn't just change who held power, but fundamentally altered how societies understood the relationship between leadership and rest. The documentation of these lost traditions has become increasingly important as historians recognize their value for understanding daily life and cultural practices in historical societies. Archaeological investigations of royal sleeping quarters have revealed fascinating details about everything from ancient textile production to early approaches to interior climate control. The analysis of preserved bedding materials has provided insights into trade networks, agricultural practices, and technological capabilities that aren't available through other historical sources. The preservation challenges facing historical royal bedchambers are particularly acute because these spaces were designed for comfort and privacy rather than permanence. Unlike temples or fortifications built to last for centuries, sleeping quarters were often updated, renovated, or completely rebuilt as tastes and technologies changed. The few examples that survive in their original condition provide invaluable windows into past ways of life. Museum efforts to recreate historical royal sleeping arrangements face unique challenges in balancing historical accuracy with modern conservation requirements. The materials and techniques used in original royal bedding often can't be replicated exactly, either because the resources are no longer available or because modern safety and conservation standards prohibit their use. Creating accurate reproductions requires extensive research into historical manufacturing techniques and materials science. The influence of royal sleep traditions on popular culture and literature has been enormous, though often romanticized beyond historical recognition. The fairy tale image of princesses sleeping in tower bedrooms or princes awakening sleeping beauties reflects deep cultural associations between royalty, sleep, and magical transformation. These literary traditions, while not historically accurate, reveal important insights into how different societies have understood the symbolic significance of royal rest. The medical analysis of historical accounts of royal sleep disorders has provided interesting case studies for modern sleep researchers. Historical descriptions of royal insomnia, nightmares, and other sleep disturbances often include enough detail to suggest specific diagnoses using contemporary medical knowledge. These historical cases demonstrate that sleep disorders have affected humans throughout recorded history, regardless of their social status or material circumstances. The seasonal variations in royal sleep practices also reflected sophisticated understanding of what modern science calls circadian rhythms and seasonal affective patterns. Many historical rulers instinctively adjusted their sleep schedules, bedroom arrangements, and evening activities to account for changing daylight patterns throughout the year. These adaptations often promoted better sleep quality than the artificial lighting and climate control that can disrupt natural sleep cycles in modern environments. The role of royal sleep in diplomatic relations extended far beyond the obvious considerations of guest accommodation and ceremonial protocol. The timing of audiences, negotiations, and state ceremonies was often coordinated around royal sleep schedules, creating complex logistical challenges for foreign envoys and diplomatic missions. Understanding and respecting a ruler's sleep preferences could be crucial for successful diplomatic outcomes. The economic impact of royal sleep practices extended throughout entire societies, creating employment for countless craftsmen, servants, and specialists whose livelihoods depended on maintaining royal comfort and security during rest. The textile workers who created royal bedding, the furniture makers who crafted sleeping platforms, the guards who maintained nighttime security, and the physicians who monitored royal health all participated in elaborate economic systems built around ensuring peaceful royal sleep. The technological innovations developed for royal sleeping quarters often had broader applications that eventually benefited entire populations. The architectural techniques pioneered for royal climate control, the manufacturing processes developed for luxury textiles, and the security systems created for palace protection were gradually adapted for civilian use. Royal sleep requirements served as testing grounds for innovations that eventually improved living conditions throughout society. The psychological pressure of maintaining elaborate sleep ceremonies while dealing with the stresses of leadership created unique mental health challenges for historical rulers. The requirement to appear dignified and controlled even during the vulnerable moments before sleep demanded extraordinary emotional discipline. Some rulers developed sophisticated techniques for mental preparation and stress management that would be recognizable to modern practitioners of meditation and mindfulness. The role of royal dreams in political decision-making reveals fascinating insights into how different cultures understood the relationship between sleep, consciousness, and divine guidance. While modern leaders might dismiss dreams as irrelevant to governance, historical rulers often considered their nocturnal visions to be crucial sources of wisdom and direction. This approach to leadership decision-making reflects entirely different assumptions about the nature of knowledge and authority. The training required for servants and courtiers who participated in royal sleep ceremonies was extensive and highly specialized. These individuals had to master complex protocols, understand the symbolic significance of different objects and actions, and maintain absolute discretion about what they observed in the royal bedchamber. The career paths of these specialists often spanned decades and required skills that combined practical service with deep cultural knowledge. The adaptation of royal sleep practices to different architectural styles and building traditions created fascinating hybrid designs that reflected both local construction techniques and universal requirements for royal comfort and security. A Moorish palace in Spain, a Gothic castle in France, and a wooden palace in Russia might all house royal sleeping quarters, but each would interpret the basic requirements through distinctly different architectural vocabularies. The changing materials available for royal bedding throughout history reflect broader patterns of trade, exploration, and technological development. The introduction of silk from China, cotton from India, and precious metals from the Americas all influenced how royal sleeping quarters were furnished and decorated. These material changes weren't just matters of fashion, but represented shifts in economic relationships and cultural exchange between different regions of the world. The influence of religious reformations and spiritual movements on royal sleep practices demonstrates how closely connected political authority was to religious belief throughout most of human history. The Protestant Reformation simplified many European royal sleep ceremonies, while the spread of Buddhism influenced sleeping practices in Asian courts. These religious changes affected not just ceremonial elements, but fundamental assumptions about the nature of royal authority and its relationship to divine power. The development of royal sleep practices specifically designed for female rulers reveals important insights into how different societies understood women's roles in political leadership. Queens and empresses faced unique challenges related to pregnancy, childbirth, and the political implications of producing heirs, and their sleeping arrangements had to accommodate these biological realities while maintaining appropriate royal dignity. The military aspects of royal sleep security evolved dramatically as warfare technology and tactics changed throughout history. Ancient rulers worried primarily about assassins with daggers or poison, while later monarchs had to consider threats from firearms, explosives, and even early aircraft. The architectural and procedural adaptations required to address these changing security challenges reveal the constant evolution of royal protection systems. The artistic documentation of royal sleep through paintings, sculptures, and decorative arts provides valuable historical evidence about sleeping arrangements that might not be preserved in written records. Royal portraits that include bedroom settings, decorative objects that adorned sleeping quarters, and architectural details captured in artwork all contribute to our understanding of how these private spaces were designed and used. The climate control innovations developed for royal sleeping quarters represent some of humanity's earliest attempts at environmental engineering. Roman hypocaust systems, Islamic evaporative cooling, and various approaches to heating and ventilation developed for royal comfort eventually influenced residential architecture throughout their respective societies. The comfort requirements of rulers drove technological developments that eventually benefited much broader populations. The ritual purification practices associated with royal sleep reflect deep cultural beliefs about the relationship between physical cleanliness, spiritual purity, and political authority. The elaborate bathing and preparation ceremonies that preceded royal rest weren't just matters of hygiene, but served important symbolic functions in maintaining the sacred nature of royal power. These practices often incorporated religious elements and required specialized knowledge about proper procedures and materials. The seasonal festivals and celebrations that affected royal sleep schedules created complex logistical challenges for palace administrators and court officials. Managing the competing demands of ceremonial obligations, entertainment requirements, and the ruler's need for adequate rest required sophisticated organizational skills and careful planning. These events often represented the most visible displays of royal magnificence and required perfect coordination between multiple departments and specialists. The evolution of royal sleep practices reflects broader changes in human understanding of health, comfort, and the relationship between mind and body. Early approaches that emphasized mystical and spiritual aspects gradually incorporated more scientific and medical perspectives as knowledge about sleep physiology developed. This transition reveals changing assumptions about the nature of human consciousness and the factors that influence rest quality. The international exchange of royal sleep traditions through marriage alliances, diplomatic missions, and cultural contact created fascinating hybrid practices that combined elements from different traditions. When rulers from different cultures intermarried, their sleeping arrangements often blended in ways that reflected both practical necessities and political symbolism. These cultural fusions demonstrate the adaptability and creativity that characterized successful royal courts. The documentation challenges facing historians who study royal sleep practices are particularly acute because these activities were often considered too private or mundane to merit detailed recording. Unlike military campaigns, diplomatic negotiations, or religious ceremonies, royal sleep was typically considered a personal matter that didn't require extensive historical documentation. The fragmentary evidence that does survive often comes from indirect sources like household accounts, architectural plans, or incidental mentions in personal letters. The modern tourist industry that has developed around historical royal sites faces unique challenges in presenting sleeping quarters to contemporary audiences. These private spaces were never intended for public viewing, and their original functions are often difficult for modern visitors to understand or appreciate. Museums and heritage sites must balance historical accuracy with contemporary expectations about privacy and appropriate public access. The psychological legacy of elaborate royal sleep traditions extends far beyond their historical significance to influence contemporary attitudes about rest, luxury, and personal comfort. The association between quality sleep and social status that characterized these historical practices continues to shape modern consumer behavior and marketing strategies. The idea that sleep quality reflects personal worth and social position has deep historical roots in royal sleep traditions. The technological developments that emerged from royal sleep requirements continue to influence modern sleep technology and bedroom design. The attention to temperature control, noise reduction, lighting management, and security that characterized historical royal sleeping quarters has evolved into contemporary smart home systems and advanced sleep monitoring technologies. The fundamental principles remain remarkably consistent across centuries of technological development. As we've journeyed through the bedchambers of history's most powerful rulers, from the cosmic voyages of Egyptian pharaohs to the elaborate ceremonies of French kings, we've discovered that the quest for perfect sleep has remained remarkably human across cultures and centuries. These weren't just stories about luxury and power, but about the universal vulnerability we all share when we close our eyes each night. Whether wrapped in the finest silks or protected by sacred spells, every ruler ultimately faced the same challenge we do: finding peace in the darkness and trusting in tomorrow's dawn. Sweet dreams, and remember that in our climate-controlled bedrooms with memory foam and blackout curtains, we sleep better than the greatest emperors of the past ever could. Rest well.